Alright, so here is another look at loading an AVI file. Ultimately, I want to load it straight into the brush, and you can do that. This one here, actually, I did. If you go to the brush menu and look for animated brushes, with version 6 and beyond, I'm using version 7 here of PD Pro Howler. What you can see is that there is an AVI to animate a brush. Now, to the best of my knowledge, that will not take the alpha channel even if the codec has it, even if the codec that you saved this AVI at has the alpha channel for transparency masking. So we'll need to do some color keying afterwards or something. But it's still a great choice. You can, for instance, if you have prepared a smaller version of the AVI that's properly cropped and has the frame count you want, you can go and load that. In fact, it tells you here at the beginning how many frames you're going to get to choose from. And then actually you don't have to load them all. You can load just a portion of that. And let's say the first 2 frames, or let's say you want to do a test of about 13 frames, and at that point you might want to store the brush, and that's just so that you have it easily available in case you're also loading another one. So when you look at the film strip here, you can see indeed that there's a couple of frames loaded, 13 frames loaded in this case, that we grabbed from this AVI file, but it's not a transparent background around it. So we loaded this from an AVI that may or may not have had the alpha channel in the AVI file. Most codecs don't, but some codecs actually have that ability. We just probably just ignore it at this point. But you have plenty of ways to go and key that. You can go and key against background colors or a variety of other techniques. In fact, you can also use this tool here that we usually left click on to grab a portion of this. Well, if you right click on it, it loads the current brush into a brush keyer. So you can color key, you can go and say what colors you want to key against to make transparent. So for instance, if you grab around here on the side, you can adjust a little bit on that clipping and high pass, low pass, and get a fairly good key, but it's not always perfect because sometimes the colors are close to the ones you're keying against, and yet you really want them to be fully opaque. So that is not necessarily the best solution either. The best solution probably is to actually have an alpha channel that you're using as a mask. And you will do that if we go the following approach. So here we'll go from scratch and start loading the original, or maybe a slightly smaller one that we had already saved, 640 by 360, but still the full size. If I recall, yeah, 224 frames, and pretty much the full cup around it still present. And what we want to do is now crop a portion of that. So and actually also mask it. Right, so we'll first use the selection mask here. That could be the oval, ellipse to alpha, perhaps something like this much. And if you want to get a better look at it, you can control shift to drag it around. Just control and then drag around. And then with the selection mask and overlay alpha, that was this option here. If that went too fast, you can see in purple the area that's not selected. And obviously that's a very crisp transition here where the magic, the marching ants are. So what we'd like to do is perhaps smooth that a little bit. And there's a couple of ways to blur that transition. You can go to the selection and do a Gaussian blur on alpha, or a box filter alpha. That's a very common technique. And when you see that, when you look at the crisp area, now it's kind of blurry, and that does the job. Another technique might be, let me undo this, U for undo. Move this down a little bit. Another technique, and in fact I'm going to intentionally make it a little bit more of an oval that's more like a side like this. And why not also with the shift key add another one that's going like this, so we kind of have both areas selected together. With the shift key you can add another alpha selection mask, but I'd like to give it kind of a fluffy edge rather than this crisp edge. And one easy way to do that is to actually just paint that right on it. So when you go to the brush tool and right click on the brush tool actually here, or if you click on the preset brushes, internal brushes here, Same thing, you get this menu, so right click on the brush tool, you get these menus, and there's a category here, paint on alpha, with a hard edge, a soft edge, or the blobby. And the blobby is the one I'm looking for, so you can now go and do kind of a blobby selection. You see the alpha is kind of disturbed a little bit as you paint, but then when you let go, it makes a nice blobby selection transition there. There's something on the edge we don't want. Let's use the right click to remove that. And in fact, that's one way that you can do it too. You can use the right button to paint on alpha, and that will remove from the current selection. So for instance, if you want the hole right here in the middle, you can just right click on there and it will mark it as non-selected. So you have left button to add to the selection, right button to remove from the selection. And with that, I'm going to make sure that this thing doesn't cut into the edge. There you go. And I have now a selection that's going across the entire animation. You see, if I'm scrubbing through here in my scroll bar, if I'm scrubbing through it, you can notice how the animation is actually still twirling underneath it. The alpha channel is not. That's a global alpha channel that's not attached to the frames. So we don't rotate that alpha channel by rotating or going through the frames themselves. But with that, now you can go and select the area of interest with the custom brush selection tool right there, and you could go, for instance, from about here, because we know the alpha channel won't go more than this. We don't need to select any more than that, and we can go to about this much. Use the Alt key and then let go, and you'll see it cycle through the remaining set of frames that are there. Now this is quite a number of frames. There's about still 200 or something out there. So I think what I'd really like to do is show you how to perhaps make that a little bit more manageable if you really don't need those 200 something frames in there. So let's wait for that to be completed. We're currently at 120. You can see the frame count at the top. I think we go to about 224 on this particular brush. And while I'm sipping at my coffee here, 190. So pretty soon we have all these frames from that AVI file, or from that originally an AVI file, from this animation selected with the alpha channel indicating what we really want to see as an opaque pixel, and the rest around it will become a transparent pixel. And at that point that we have picked that up, we can go to the brush tool again and store to manage it, and we should see the alpha channel around it transparent, and there it is indeed. So around it is transparent. And so we can go and Control D to clear the selection. We can go and in fact delete the entire animation, create something new, different size, whatever it is, and then just paint with that. So this brush that we have here is now usable for painting, but it still is in the alpha mode that we had used a little bit earlier, where we paint on alpha. There's a quick shortcut to reset the brush. That's the decimal point dot. That will reset it to the default, and the default is a single. Actually, not the default. It will make it just a very small 1 pixel line. And so you can do Control D to clear the whole buffer. You can go back to this brush and paint with that, and now it's just painting the normal way on it. Now, I really wanted to also show you creating loading the original file. So let's go and load the original AVI. Let's take the very large original one here. That's a 1280 by 720 pixel. Oh no, maybe not. This one seems to be a little bit smaller. But still 224 frames, and it's bigger than the area that we really care to keep for our animated brush. So kind of like a repeat drill here. What is it we're going to do? First of all, we're going to crop to the area of real interest. Okay, so that will be, let's see, in this case maybe we'll go very tight to the central white area here. So before we do anything else, let's toss this one. Show it at 100%. Yep, that's the full size. So let's go and select the rectangular area. Okay, and we could say we want about this much. That's what we want to keep from this animation. And as you scrub through it, you can verify if the area of interest remains in your selection. Alright, let's go do that and crop to that selection. Crop it. Where is it? There. Crop to selection, and it will crop not just this frame but the entire animation. Alright, so now important to check if the animation is still what the dimensions are, because you might have, and sure enough we have in this case, we have odd dimensions, 309 pixel wide and 269 pixel height. That's not very good for saving to certain AVI files, depending on the codec. So certain codecs don't like that, and I highly recommend that you do something like resampling in order to change it to a slightly lesser or higher value, at least some even number. Right? So for instance, instead of 309, you might want to go to 308, and instead of 267, you could go to 268, or maybe this one here we increase to 312. The whole idea is to keep it at least an even number, so a multiple of 2, or perhaps even one that's a multiple of 4 or multiple of 8. That will increase the chances that you will not see any problems. It will reduce the problems when you save it to an AVI file. Why? Well, because certain codecs that you inevitably have in your AVI file, certain codecs do not like odd numbers on the width and the height. And maybe it's not the codec, maybe it's actually the playback viewer, the image, the multimedia player. Now, so Windows Media Player may be okay with it, but if you use a different media player, maybe it's going to stall if it sees a odd number. And sometimes even a multiple of 2, maybe it needs a multiple of 4. So I always try to remember, after cropping to a selection, double check if the image info shows you that you have an even number of pixels in the width and the height. Preferably not just an even, but even more so a multiple of 4 or multiple of 8. Some codecs need even more. I mean, they may need a multiple of 24 or 64 or whatnot. So you really got to know, you have to know what it is, what the restrictions are of the codec you're going to use. Otherwise, you're playing with fire essentially in the unknown. So we have this animation now, still 200 and something frames. Next thing we want to do is reduce the frame count. Now we can do that in a couple of ways. One is to just reduce it, so we can right click and say where are the frames that we want to reduce. We can do a time stretch, and you could for instance say take out 1 out of 2, so you divide by 2 the total count, and if you don't do the frame blending, it's simply going to toss them. If you do the frame blending, it's going to merge them into the existing remaining ones and blend them together. If you just toss them, it's going to be a little bit faster, and at that point you do have just 112 frames, down from 224. Another thing you might want to do is now perhaps also select the area of interest with the oval selection mask, something like this, and you get your area of selection, and then perhaps you still want fewer frames. Let's move this over a little bit, there you go, and also do the Gaussian blur for a nice soft transition. And you might still need, oh, that's a little bit too much. Let's go and move it down a tiny little bit, and Gaussian blur just a little bit, not too much. There you go. And you might still want to make it even smaller. So let's go and where is it? On the animation, frames, same menu here, and where is it? Time stretch, right? And maybe instead of 112, we still want half of that, but this time we'll blend the frames that we have, and we get 56 frames that don't lose the whole information. Now sometimes you get a little bit of tearing and blurring depending on how fast things move here, right? Because you get 2 frames together resulting into 1. Alright, so now at that point we might need to also increase the contrast a little bit. That will be perhaps something we do in another segment. So at that point, let's go save it, and then let's also capture it as a custom animated brush. Save it as an AVI we've seen, or we're going to see a few times. Let's go and see how to capture it again as an animated brush. Again, we have this custom brush pickup tool. This one has a shortcut. It's B for brush. Okay, this is really a reminder that Dog Waffle is a very brush-centric application. A lot of things you don't do so much with layers, you do with brushes. And so you can go and indicate the area of interest. If you don't know exactly where that alpha transition is ending, just grab the whole thing from the outside, and it will use the alpha mask to actually flag the pixels as opaque or transparent inside the brush. Use the Alt key before you let go. So you have the Alt key down and then let go, and now it's going through the remaining sequence of frames and capture that into an animated brush. Make sure you then store and manage this brush so that you can do some other stuff to it, like change its size furthermore, rotate it, change the hue, saturation, and value. But of course over here we can go and Control D that, and we can paint with it now. So this one here is a brush we can use, and we may want to save it. So let's go to the media browser right here and store it. So select your favorites or whatever category you want, and then go and add this current brush to this particular category. Save your current brush with all the settings, not just the image sequence, but also all the other parameters that make this brush what it is. So let's call this one my very own brush number 1. Okay, it's really up to you to call it something that you will remember and recognize. And this will be in alphabetic order, so we'll have to go look for M as in my, M-N-O, it's down here somewhere, there it is. Okay, and I need to tag this, there it is, the tag to keep it down there if I don't want to lose it. And so here's my very own brush. If I use this one, it paints with this. If I use this one, it paints with that. And if I use this one I just saved, it's my very own brush here again. Alright, that's it for a quick way to work with an AVI file and convert that to a custom animated brush. And of course, that's just a tool. At this point you want to think, what is it you want to actually put into that brush that makes it meaningful to keep it as an animated brush. And that's for the next couple of elements.